Hello there, everyone. I'm Matt here from MiniWorldMasters, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Mora, or the Realm of Mora. Better yet, Mora in general. So what is Mora? Who is Mora? Mora is a being of great power, a goddess. She is the goddess and the creator of the world of Mora. She created the world from her consciousness, love, and sheer desire for creation. She molded, sculpted the realms until it was essentially whole to her satisfaction. She then divided herself into several different children to govern the different aspects of the realms. She created the realm of fire and a deity to go along with that, and so on and so forth. These deities that were created would become known as the greater deity. This time would be known as the Age of Creation. During this age, the realms were forged, and the beings of Mora were created and constructed to rule and guide in the image of Mora. Her ideal image is this utopia that manifests itself basically throughout all the other planes, manifests itself on the material plane. So her objective would basically be to have this essential center of the realm that is the collaboration and combination of all of the different aspects of it to converge and create one perfect living environment. So first, Mora created the astral sea, and within it the forces of both good and evil to coexist as positive and negative energies. These energies swirl with one another more like oil and water rather than having a specific, here and here. So because of that, they're constantly changing on this grand scale. You have kind of a yin and yang almost of the two, but they are constantly flowing with one another, and sometimes those streams get crossed, cut off, separated, and then return. But essentially, always moving and always changing are the two sort of astral, or within the astral sea, the 2 points of sort of positive and negative and good and evil, essentially. As with balance, you need to have both. And Mora understands this. So this astral sea, held in its vastness of creation, would basically be the bowl for which to put all the ingredients of the realm. So secondly, she formed the ethereal plane. That would act as the glue to bind all of these different elements. And with that, she also created Death, the first of the greater deities, the evil and the watcher of the dead. She began to separate and isolate the elements and began forming of the elemental planes. With it came the creation of Kadal for the plane of fire, Mora for the plane of earth, Oshina for the plane of water, and Poi for the realm of air. Lastly, Mora began to form the material plane. Through this creation, also manifested the Shadowfell and the Feywilds, respectively, giving life to the greater deity Nida for the Shadowfell and Sutheya for the Feywilds. Mere opposites of one another, and act like a teeter-totter, essentially, with the material plane being on the center pivot of both of them. So Avina was formed from this balance, and she gave life to the beings of the material plane. She is essentially the mother of all life, as far as living creatures are concerned. And she acts more, I suppose, like the opposite of death, and the giver of life as opposed to the taker of life. Okay, so next you have the Age of Formation, the beginning. By far the longest age, spanning tens of thousands of years before time was even relevant, and it's a time where Mora's children, so the greater deities, would begin to craft the world and its inhabitants within it. So after that, you have what's called the Age of Worship. So this is after the world had been shaped a little bit and beings had kind of started to manifest and inhabit the world as the greater deities have kind of shaped these creatures in their own image. Essentially, Mora's creations grew and changed the world that she had manifested from her original love with her own image of this grand utopia in mind. Her children took note over the many centuries and thousands of years that the strength of worship of followers increased their power and ability to alter the world to their own incarnation of what they would deem as their specific utopia. So many greater deities chose to divide themselves even further to stretch out their worship to a broader body of influence. Soon the gods would begin to conflict with one another as each of them struggled to maintain the image of the world that Mora had tasked for them to create of her own will. This eventually led to a massive conflict between all of the gods and their respective followers, devastating the lands, tearing them apart, tearing the world apart. And during this time, the lands were churned over and changed dramatically as the gods forced their wills to the submission of others, and back and forth. That sort of went for a long period of history. Which ends up being lost throughout the ages as civilizations rose and fell and were again churned and turned back over to nature and then converted back into civilizations and only to fall again. These conflicts between the gods grew even greater over the years, and the power began to pull to one side as Kidal rose in power and influence with his power of fire and flame over the lands. And thus we move into the age of Betrayal, where Kidal wanted more direct influence on the material plane, as he sought to tear a path through the material plane that he might burn his influence across these lands, being that the material plane was the highest concentration of life and thus the most worship you could possibly obtain. The more worshippers per capita, essentially, than any other plane that exists, that he could dominate. So in attempts to do this, Kidal was betrayed by his kin, as many other gods basically joined to prevent him from complete dominance over the material plane. Kidal's anger of this betrayal was so intense that his essence exploded and gave life to Kal, the first of the demons, and Stragoth, a devil. So Kidal was forced back out of the material plane, combination of Mora, Oshina, and some of the other gods, but more specifically those two, so the god of earth and water, the force of which sent the heart of Mora far into the ocean, so that if he might force his way through, he would have to go through all this water to get anywhere, and thus would be isolated even if he were to power his way through with his fiery ways. During this, a portion of Kidal's essence and power was trapped on the material plane and is said to remain upon the material plane to this day. So this leads us into what's the Broken Age. This is essentially where nations begin to rise again, and some gods became more fearful of the lust of worship, and some have, taken note of the effects that it had on Kidal, corruption of his mind and his lust for more, essentially. So some gods saw this as an enlightenment and sought new ways to manipulate the worship of their followers and gain even more influence, whereas some others kind of pulled back a little bit. It is in this time when mortals of the material plane put more faith into their gods than ever before. After the separation of the heart of Mora, the magical weave of the world was weakened, and thus a lot of the powerful magic, spells, wizards of that variety and strength and power, long lost. So people put a lot more faith into the gods by that logic, and no race except for the elves of Illyria had any knowledge of this magical power that once was wielded by mortals. So by that, the elves safeguarded this magic for centuries, and they didn't want to see the world grow unstable through the use of high-level magic that wasn't necessarily safe or stable to use. Now that the weave was weakened, there was a high percentage chance of something catastrophic happening to the user or to the environment around them and those around them when wielding high-level magic spells, essentially, in the world now. So only the most elite of Illyria's elves on the gold and members of the Golden Council, essentially, which is this hierarchy of ancient elves and high wizards of Illyria, maintain this knowledge, have any knowledge of this magic, and they choose to hide it even from their own kind for protection purposes. So fast forward to recorded year 811, where an explorer named Martii Vitoro, born of the nation of Avondale, braving more and sailing across, finding the heart of Mora, as he called it. He claimed that he could feel a grand magical power that he'd never felt before when he returned from this island, sharing tales of how savage and untamed the land was, and how powerful he became whilst he was there. His strength and skill grew at a rapid pace, and there was something more to it. So when Martii returned and shared what he'd learned with everyone, the nations of the world began to try to colonize this land as quickly as possible. First of which, of course, was the nation of Avondale, who sailed across and began to colonize this land as they were in part to, at this point, in their kingdom. So Martii returned to the nation of Avondale and then eventually was summoned essentially by Alira, where he was invited, as well as the current king of the nation of Avondale at the time, whose name was Kephilos Avondale. Kephilos brought back from the elves the gift of these minor magical powers and spells as a reward of this great discovery. From then on, the nation of Avondale has always trained its noble lines in the ways of magic. So over the years, people have bent the knee more and more to the nation as its power grows and grows and grows. So once Martii was brought to Alira, Kephilos returned, but Martii did not. He was never seen ever again. So nearly 300 years passed since this discovery, and the nations of Avondale and Rodolph have both invested interest in trying to control this island or this small continent to reap the rewards and benefits for their nations themselves. So that is where we are in the current year now, which is 1091. And that about does it for our introduction into Mora as a realm. Next section, we will go through the planes in a little bit more detail and talk about the intricacies of some of the gods that govern them as well, and start delving into the meat of what makes up the realm. Until then, I'm Matt from MiniWorldMasters, and we'll see you next time.